Thousands of people stroll past these buildings every day without giving them a second glance. No windows, not a soul in sight. The facades look like scenes from a video game when the developers ran out of time to add textures. They look like houses, sometimes like office buildings, sometimes even like churches, but you won't see any signs of life inside. No, we're not talking about another ghost town. All of this is located in the middle of Los Angeles, a city where every square foot of land is worth millions, and yet many fake buildings simply stand here quietly, just for the sake of appearance. Or is the case not so simple? What lies inside these buildings? Who built them? And most importantly, why? What do Los Angeles' fake buildings hide? Do you think it's a synagogue? No, it's not. Does it look like an office building? Yes, but there are no offices inside. This is the Tower of Hope. It looks like a work of art, but it's something else. And here's the Beverly Center. Well, it's definitely not fake. There are stores inside, but it's also a kind of facade, just a more sophisticated one. They all hide oil wells. But how? They extract oil in the heart of LA, even now? Yes, they do. And it all started over 100 years ago, but not with fake buildings. Imagine, 1892. The sun is scorching. Dusty roads, hundreds of workers living in shacks. Among them is Edward Doheny. He seems like an ordinary merchant, but he's not. He was the best student in his class. He worked for the U.S. Geological Survey. He explored the Black Hills, Arizona, and New Mexico. He tried to make money from mines and owned some. He tried everything from mining to small-scale real estate speculation. Several times he was close to success, but each time it all collapsed. In the end, he became so impoverished that he couldn't even pay for a bed in a dormitory. His only daughter, Eileen, had recently passed away. His wife was grief-stricken, and he was heartbroken too, on the verge. It's during these terrible times that something unexpected happens. The story goes that a cart pulls up to the store where Doheny works. He approaches it and notices something. There are black, tarry stains on the wheels. The smell is sharp, bitter, and chemical. Doheny is struck by a realization. Oil is literally flowing from the ground here, in the center of Los Angeles, where skyscrapers now stand. Doheny makes a crazy decision. He turns to help from his old friend, Charles Canfield, who had once managed to rise up to the top, only then to lose almost everything in real estate. Doheny borrows $400 from him, a huge amount of money at the time, almost a year's salary. He rents a plot of land, takes a 60-foot eucalyptus trunk, hauls it out, digs it in, and starts hammering the ground. Literally, without any huge equipment, without a team. Then suddenly, a strike. Through clay, rocks, and sand, a stream of black gold gushed forth. That moment marked the beginning of the oil rush. In just a couple of years, hundreds of wells were drilled in the area where the first well had been. Then, thousands. Los Angeles became the oil capital of the United States, long before Houston, Texas, and the rigs rising above the seas and oceans. Edward Doheny was one of the first in California to make millions from oil. He built an empire. Factories, railroads, political connections. He even gave a $100,000 loan to U.S. Secretary of the Interior Albert B. Fall in 1921, which was actually a disguised bribe. This later led to the Teapot Dome scandal, one of the biggest corruption stories in the early 20th century. Doheny later inspired the film There Will Be Blood. The main character, a predatory, cruel, paranoid tycoon, is largely based on him. A year later, another iconic figure appeared in the oil industry, Emma Summers. By profession, she was a music teacher who taught piano. She had no investors, just determination and a sharp mind. She put everything she had and went all in. She had $700 and invested it in a well a few blocks from Doheny's wells. It was about a mile northwest of the current Dodger Stadium. She personally supervised the drilling, negotiated the contracts, and hired the workers. She encounters difficulties. She drills another well, and another, all on credit. Later, she recalled, "When I found myself $10,000 in debt, I thought if I ever got that paid, and as much more in the bank, I would be glad to quit." She earns much more, but she doesn't leave. A few years later, she has 50 wells, an oil company, and huge influence in the industry. She was called the Oil Queen. At a time when women didn't even have the right to vote, she became one of America's first oil tycoons. A woman with a genius for affairs. It may sound paradoxical, but the fact exists. If Mrs. Emma A. Summers were less than a genius, she could not, as she does today, control the Los Angeles oil markets, wrote the San Francisco Call newspaper about her. The industry is booming. What happens next? The beginning of the 20th century. Los Angeles is a city on the rise. In 1900, California produced 4 million barrels of oil. By 1920, that number had risen to 77 million. Oil derricks were springing up like mushrooms after rain. In the 1920s, new fields were opened: Huntington Beach, Long Beach, Santa Fe Springs, Dominguez, and Inglewood. In 1921, a well was drilled on Signal Hill, which spouted a powerful fountain of oil. The area, already built up with houses, instantly turned into a forest of oil derricks. It was nicknamed Hedgehog because of the abundance of wooden towers. By 1923, Los Angeles was producing 20% of the world's oil. Hundreds of oil derricks rose through the fog above the city, and then a profusion of palm trees appeared. Tall, slender, exotic. Although today palm trees are a symbol of LA, in the past there were almost none here. They were brought to America by missionaries back in the 19th century. But many palm trees were planted in the 1930s as part of a program to help the unemployed and prepare the city for the 1932 Olympic Games. More than 25,000 trees became a decorative facade. They rose toward the sky next to the oil derricks. This is the image of a dream city, hiding the industrial reality. A reality in which there were no environmental standards or restrictions. The oil industry was growing rapidly. So was the city. At the time of the drilling of the first Doheny's well in 1892, just over 50,000 people lived in LA. By 1900, the population had grown to 102,500, and there were more than 1,150 wells. They were operated by over 200 companies. Oil seemed to turn the city into an anthill. By 1930, the population had already exceeded 1 million people. Derricks stood everywhere, between residential neighborhoods, in backyards, on the sidewalks. Roaring smoke, the smell of oil, no filters. But the city continued to flourish. Against the backdrop of pumping oil derricks, mansions were built, new schools opened, and streets and highways stretched out. The city grew, attracting people from all over the country. Oil became the engine of the economy. It infiltrated all spheres of life. Business and aviation flourished. New roads were built, and industry developed. And all this happened because of the growth of oil production. In addition, Hollywood was rising, and it was also directly related to oil production. Sounds strange? Let us explain. Many early Hollywood investors made their fortunes in oil. Back then, the film industry was something new, fashionable, and glamorous. So many began to invest in the magic of the big screen. Oil tycoons founded studios, produced films, and financed directors. Some truly believed in art. They were experimenting, trying something new. Others simply laundered money on projects they knew would most probably fail. It was both a business and a cover. And then everything went the other way. Movie stars received huge income, and taxes ate up half of their money. But then there was a loophole: oil investments. Under the law at the time, investments in oil fields provided tax concessions, as much as 27.5%. And what did producers and movie stars do? Of course, they invested. Bing Crosby, for example, the man whose voice was known to every American, was not only a singer, but also an oil man. He invested in drilling companies, wells, and licenses. The legendary singer Frank Sinatra, actor James Stewart, comedian and host Bob Hope, and many, many others also invested in oil wells. Overall, Hollywood had become an investment target, and oil was the sponsor of it all. Just imagine, Gone with the Wind is being filmed, while a little further away, another well is being drilled. That was the reality of LA. It seemed that it would always be this way. The oil would flow forever and the city would live off its black gold. But by the 1950s, it became clear that the era was gradually coming to an end. The wells that had once gushed like fountains began to quiet down. The flow rate was falling. The pressure in the strata decreased. Production became increasingly expensive and unpredictable. A simple shovel and eucalyptus log no longer worked. It was necessary to drill deeper, more precisely, and that required huge investments. It became unprofitable to maintain the old wells, and the city was growing around. Los Angeles was changing. Fields were built up, roads and highways were constructed, dream neighborhoods were developed, land was becoming more expensive every day. People didn't want to look at rusty pipes and wake up to the roar of pumps. They wanted to live in a commercial, in a glossy magazine, in a dream. By the 1970s, oil production in LA had fallen by 90%. Many derricks were removed. The wells were mothballed. But the oil did not run out. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, there are still about 61 million barrels in the region's subsoil. That is, there is oil, but it is difficult and expensive to get to it, especially if there's a school, a residential neighborhood, or a mall above it. The figure of 61 million barrels seems significant, but only if one does not know the whole story. And here it is. Over the entire period, almost 9 billion barrels of oil have been extracted in the Los Angeles basin. That's a huge amount. Imagine that each barrel is a metal tank about 35 inches high. If you line them up on their long sides in a row, you'd wrap them around the equator, about 200 times. It's truly impressive. It seems that during the heyday of the oil industry in LA, every resident could become a millionaire. But even then, things weren't so easy. Although some landowners and oil companies did make fortunes, most Los Angeles residents never got rich. Many did not own land and had no rights to extract oil, and many simply did not manage to take advantage of the moment. In addition, oil wells are not infinite. Most of them were rapidly depleted. Yes, there used to be a lot of oil in the city, but as in the days of the gold rush, only a few really made money. The rest invested in risky drilling projects and lost everything. What about today? Is it possible to get rich if you discover oil in LA today? Let's do the math. The average price of oil today is approximately $65 per barrel. This means that the remaining 61 million barrels are theoretically worth just over $4 billion. Sounds impressive? Yes. If so, why don't landowners in LA continue to drill? There is still oil there, yes, but if deposits are discovered under your house, it won't help you get rich. Even if there is a fountain of black gold in your backyard, the path to millions may be closed. Completely. Why? The answer is simple. Just because oil is on your property doesn't mean it belongs to you. California has a law on mineral rights. This is a legal concept whereby ownership of land, surface rights, does not necessarily include the right to materials found beneath it. How did this happen? In the early 20th century, especially in the 1920s and 30s, many companies bought mineral rights separately from land. Owners unaware of the value of the subsoil often sold these rights for small amounts of money. Since then, these rights have been transferred as property. They can be sold, inherited, or held as an investment fund. In essence, the land is yours, but others have the right to drill, build infrastructure, and extract resources from it. So even if you find oil on your own property, what lies beneath it may have long belonged to Chevron or a private fund from the 1920s. But let's assume that both the land and the subsoil belong to you. Drilling requires a lot of money. You need a drilling rig, which costs tens of thousands of dollars to rent. You also need pumps, casing pipes, pressure control equipment, special teams, and much more. The average cost of drilling is between $2.9 and $5.6 million per well. Add that to operating costs, which include equipment maintenance, land rental, processing, and logistics, totaling $26 per barrel for large companies. Smaller producers require about $44 per barrel. Add to that taxes and fees, up to 12.5% royalties, plus local and environmental taxes. It follows that the profit after all expenses can be $20 to $25 per barrel. Multiplying by 61 million barrels of remaining oil, we get $1,525 million. Not bad. But that's assuming that one derrick extracts all the remaining. The reality is different. Currently, the average oil production per well in LA is between 2.1 and 3.3 barrels per day. For comparison, at the beginning of the 20th century, some wells in the city produced up to 1,000 barrels per day. And now, that's the approximate annual figure. If one well produces about 1,000 barrels per year, then 6,100 active wells would be needed to extract the remaining oil in 10 years. This is a loss-making venture and complete madness. Plus, you can't just drill anywhere. Today, Los Angeles is one of the most regulated regions in the US for oil production. You can't drill closer than 300 meters from residential buildings, schools, and hospitals. To start drilling, you must undergo an environmental assessment, obtain a permit from the state, comply with zoning regulations, and prove that you will not harm schools and residential areas. And even if you do all that, the law may still stand in your way. In 2022, LA City Council voted to ban new oil drilling. But in 2024, a court overturned the ban, saying that it's up to the state to regulate. In response, the governor of California passed AB 3233. giving cities the right to restrict or ban oil production. So in the end, you probably won't be able to start drilling. Today, there are thousands of wells left in the city. More than 5,000 are officially registered. Some are still pumping oil. But if production is unprofitable, why are there still so many facilities? Yes, as we already mentioned, most wells yield a pittance, 2 to 3 barrels per day. But with high prices, even such volumes are profitable if the well has already been drilled and the main costs have been recouped. Also, the oil business in the US still receives tax breaks. Furthermore, dismantling a well is expensive, from $50,000 to $100,000 or more. And even if you do everything properly, with complete sealing and restoration, the price can easily exceed $1 million per well. Almost no one does this. For small operators, these are unaffordable sums. Just to preserve known abandoned wells in California, a minimum of $550 million is needed. And closing everything properly would require about a minimum of $9 billion. And taking into account reclamation and inflation, it may take up to $21 billion. At the same time, each well has an average of $1 in insurance. Yes, that's right, $1. It seems unbelievable, but in the past, it was possible to buy one blanket insurance policy for hundreds of wells, and that was enough. But now there are also thousands of such abandoned dangerous wells in the city, which could become a problem at any moment. 1985, Ross Store clothing shop. Suddenly, there was a flash, a loud bang, and concrete flying everywhere. The asphalt literally swelled up and then burst. 23 people were injured. The cause was methane that had seeped from the underground into the basement. All it took was one spark, from the elevator to a live outlet, and everything blew up. The source was an old well, drilled back in 1902. No one knew about it. No documents remained. No one was held responsible. There are thousands like this, all over California, all over America. They can be found on a special interactive map called Well Finder on the California Department of Conservation website, but often their location is unknown. Such wells can be hidden under schools, stores, and parks. Sometimes they're found by accident during construction work, sometimes after a tragedy. They're called orphan wells. They have no owner, which means no one is responsible for methane or chemical leaks. But there are not only forgotten wells underground. There's a whole system connected to active ones. These are pipes, tanks, valves. They pump, filter, and transport further. This entire network is like a circulatory system, only with oil instead of blood. It's everywhere. Intersections, neighborhoods, schoolyards, everything is filled with oil veins. But you can't see them. If there's a leak somewhere, part of the city could explode. Another American nightmare comes to mind, the town of Centralia in Pennsylvania. In 1962, coal caught fire underground there. More than half a century has passed, and it's still smoldering. The houses are empty, the roads are distorted, and the ground is collapsing. A man-made hell. Could something similar happen because of oil? It's not impossible. But at the moment, there's another problem, and it's currently more significant and real. The main threat is not even a loud explosion, but quiet, daily killing. A cocktail of toxins rises from the underground along with oil and gas. Methane displaces oxygen. The head spins, the heart races, and a person can lose consciousness. But benzene is even more dangerous. It's a carcinogenic and destroys bone marrow, causing anemia and leukemia, especially in children. There's also hydrogen sulfide, a gas that smells like rotten eggs. Inhaling it is like slowly switching off your brain. The smell of oil and gasoline is psychoactive. It stimulates the brain's dopamine system. It gives a brief rush of pleasure. That's why many people like it, just as people like the smell of marker pens or acetone. It causes mild excitement, and that only makes it more absurd. We can live surrounded by oil pipes, inhale a smell that excites us, and don't even realize how dangerous it is. And these are not fantasies, but statistics. In Los Angeles, for example, the rate of cancer among children is higher than in the cleaner Riverside County. But even that's not all. According to a Newsy investigation, more than 600 schools across America are located within 150 meters of active oil and gas wells. That's 245,000 children who walk into a classroom every morning with a derrick outside the window, or a pipe running underneath it, somewhere nearby. For example, oil has been pumped under Beverly Hills High School for almost a century. You don't believe it? Now this derrick is known as the city's most popular prop. Yes, it's the very structure we showed at the beginning of the video. In the late 1990s, two former students decided to decorate the fence around the well. Cold concrete was replaced with tiles painted by children with cancer. Artists drew lines and shapes, and the children added color. The design was abstract, a chaos of colors. The official opening took place in 2001. It was named the Tower of Hope. The name seems like a mockery. It's absurd, especially when you know the full story of this school and this tower. Oil production on the grounds of Beverly Hills High School began in the early 1900s. The school itself was not built here until 1928. Drilling operations continued here for decades. Although the land under the school is state-owned, the mineral rights belonged to private companies. And there turned out to be a lot of oil there. By the 1980s, up to 400 barrels per day were pumped from beneath the campus. There were about 19 wells here, combined into a so-called drilling island. The income from this went straight to the district to which the school belonged. Millions of dollars. This money was also used to repair buildings, pay teachers' salaries, and even buy new computers. It would seem that this was a win-win situation. But toxic fumes were seeping into the school's grounds. The students were getting sick. In 2003 and 2004, there were 3 lawsuits. First from 25 graduates, then from 400. All of them had studied in Beverly from the 1970s to the 1990s. All of them had cancer. Lawyers from Texas, Barron and Budd, specialists in suits against large companies, joined the case. As a result, 94 lawsuits were filed. The main point: the plaintiffs studied near oil wells and literally breathed in toxic fumes. The wells were super close to sports fields, a running track, a soccer field, a stadium. Just imagine gym classes next to drilling. Authorities and oil companies denied the connection between wells and disease. And then there was 2017. Vinico went bankrupt. But the court said the company was not obligated to dismantle the tower. That alarmed both the school and the city. Vinico eventually paid $760,000 for the cleanup. It wasn't until 2021 that the tower was completely demolished. But this was not the only place that tried to disguise itself. As the city's population grew, the question of its appearance arose. People came for palm trees, not pipes. Oil companies realized that it was easier to disguise them than to remove. Thus began the era of architectural camouflage. Wells began to be built into buildings. The facade was a church, or a synagogue, or an office, and inside were pumps, pipes, and the clanking of metal. Here is Cardiff Tower, a concrete facade in the spirit of the 1970s, columns, a sign. At first glance, it looks like a synagogue, or a city hall office. The architecture is tranquil, even solemn. The neighborhood is quiet and residential. People walk by, no one pays attention. But they should, because it's a disguise. In reality, it's an oil tower, built in 1966 by Occidental Petroleum. The idea was to hide the derrick right in the city so that no one would complain. It worked. Inside was a driller on rails. It moves in a circle and serves about 40 wells. It operates around the clock without interruption. In 2001, the building was renovated. Now the facility is managed by Pacific Coast Energy, but the principle remains the same: oil behind the facade. Even at the Beverly Center, one of the main shopping centers, things are not so simple. It was built in 1982 on the site of Beverly Park. Boutiques, food courts, panoramic elevators, yes, all this is quite real, but behind the building is a well. The mall was built directly over the Salt Lake oil field. A drilling rig is located in the western part of the mall. It serves about 54 wells, owned by Centennial Peak Resources. They operate around the clock. Oil flows underground, right under the feet of mall visitors. Towers behind fake windows, drilling rigs under the roof of a residential building. Even if you live nearby, you may never guess that oil's being pumped right next to you. The city has learned to hide itself, and it continues to do so to this day. As the saying goes, everyone loves sausage, but nobody wants to see how it's made. The same is true here. Oil is needed, but no one wants to see how it's extracted. This is Los Angeles. Everything here can be a backdrop, even an oil derrick. However, it's worth mentioning that disguising buildings is a common practice in North America, and not just when oil is being extracted behind the walls. A striking example is the facilities built during the Cold War. At the time, the US and Canada built many strange buildings. From the outside, they were unremarkable: offices, houses, hangars, but inside, there was defense equipment, communications, fuel, everything that could help survive in the event of a nuclear war. This was called architectural disguise. The facades were blind, without windows, or with fake dark windows. The buildings were designed so that no one would guess what was inside. Neither civilians nor enemies, not even satellites. Boeing Plant 2 in Seattle, Washington. This is not just a Hollywood-level set, but an entire city built on the roof of the factory. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the authorities feared air attacks from Japan, and although no Japanese planes ever reached Seattle, fear took its toll. A fake suburb was built over the strategically important Boeing plant where B-17 bombers were assembled. Yes, plywood houses, trees, lawns, parked cars, and even small streets were literally placed on top of the roof. The idea was brought to life by John Stewart Detley, a Hollywood set designer. Everything looked so realistic that from the air, the site resembled a residential area. Underneath the scenery, 30,000 people were working, assembling 300 heavy bombers per month. The factory continued to operate until the Cold War, and the structures of the roof were eventually dismantled. Today, only photographs and stories remain of this place, an entire plywood city to hide weapons production. Everything related to the military is impressive in scale. In China, for example, there's an empty city on one of the training grounds, a replica of a district in the capital of Taiwan. There's a fake presidential palace, streets, residential areas. Everything looks like a real city, but it's empty. It was built specifically for military exercises. Chinese soldiers practice street fighting, building captures, and amphibious operations there. Everything looks frighteningly realistic, right down to the road signs. Did you know that there's a similar ghost town in California? Yes, that's right. At Fort Irwin Military Base in the Mojave Desert, entire settlements have been built to mimic Middle Eastern cities. There are mosques, markets, bus stops, and even actors portraying civilians. These sets are full-fledged training grounds. There are many reasons for disguise. Take West Village at 253 West 13th Street, for example. There's an electrical substation there, disguised as an ordinary building. It was built in 1930 in the Art Deco style and serves to provide power to the I&D subway line. In Brooklyn, at 58 Joralemon Street, there's a building that looks like a typical townhouse, but it's actually a ventilation shaft and emergency exit from the subway. The windows are covered with black paint, and the facade is styled like a residential house so as not to stand out from the surrounding development. But the most impressive disguise is not a building, it's an island. Or rather, something that looks like an island. Not far from the coast of Long Beach, just a couple of miles from the beaches and promenades, lie the Thumbs Islands. From the shore, it looks like paradise. Waterfalls, palm trees, well-groomed bushes, white resort-style towers. Great architecture, lighting, even sound installations. It all looks like a luxury hotel overlooking the ocean. But it's a deception, a disguise. In fact, these are oil platforms built back in 1965. The acronym THUMS stands for the first letters of the companies that invested in the project: Texaco, Humble, Union Oil, Mobil, and Shell. There are dozens of drilling rigs on the islands that are still pumping oil from the ocean floor. They've been operating around the clock for almost 60 years. But the most important thing is that disguising all these rigs was not just an idea, it was a condition. That's right. When the companies applied for permission to drill off the coast of Long Beach, the authorities set a condition. Everything had to be made so beautiful that people would not be upset, so that the beaches would not lose tourists, so that the rigs would not ruin the view from the window. They hired the best specialists to work on the project, including Disneyland architect Joseph Linish. Their task was to turn the drilling platform into a backdrop for a luxurious lifestyle. The disguise cost $22 million at the time. Today, that's almost $200 million. Not for production, not for equipment, just to fool the eye. Thumbs Islands became a symbol of the oil industry, not only because of its record performance, although it was impressive. In 50 years, more than 1 billion barrels of oil were extracted from the island. The island became a cultural phenomenon. Behind palm trees, shop windows, waterfalls. Oil production continues in LA, but it's not visible, because oil is still here. It hasn't disappeared. It's just not something people talk about.